again. Welcome to Ground Pass. It's nice to have you all back. I do feel like, if you listen to our usual fairly chill theme, it might not necessarily fit the vibe of, being Miami, get the Miami Vice theme playing in the background. But someone who is always bright and upbeat is Anastasia, who's coming to me from Miami, from some boiler room somewhere, right?
You know what? I did look at the background just as we were about to start, and I was like, it looks like I'm either in a prison or a boiler room or something. But for those who don't know, the Miami Open is held at the Hard Rock Stadium, and the Hard Rock Stadium is usually a football stadium, an American football stadium. So it's a stadium or a court within a stadium. And so right now what I'm in is a reporter radio booth where usually, any journalists who are calling the football games for radio sit and then they record because they can see the field from where I am. I wish I could show you my view and I'll show Nick my view. I'll probably take a photo and post it on Instagram. But
you've got a really good court view of the court within a stadium. A stadium within a stadium.
Yeah. So I'll probably take a photo of this and post it to our social media so people understand where we're at. But yeah, so it's really interesting because all the sort of press rooms around are like traditional sports press rooms, which is quite different from, it was kind of similar to what it was in Indian Wells, but it's a lot bigger here. In fact, everything's just a lot bigger. And then you have to put this stadium within a stadium. It's cool. It's a different experience, definitely a different experience than Indian
So would you say that, I think it's a good time to go into the vibe of the place, but would you say the Miami Open, it's kind of the vibe it's going for is go big or go home, like as big an event as they could possibly do?
I think that is the correct description of it because, and I really don't know square footage or anything, but this seems to be in a smaller location than the Indian Wells grounds. But at the same time, they want it to feel bigger. And I don't know if you would. Sorry, I just got distracted because they are drying the courts. They are drying the courts, and we're going to get into a little bit of why I'm so shocked yet excited that they're drying the courts. But let me just continue with Nick's question, and then we'll go into that. But it just feels big. There's so much going on. Everything just seems exciting and elevated, I think is the wrong word, but there seems to be some sort of spark and pizzazz to everything that happens here that makes it feel like bigger. It's almost like they want to be like, look at us, we are also a 1,000 event. Is the vibe that I feel when I came here.
Do you think there's a little bit of competition with Indian Wells then? Obviously we don't know the behind the scenes or anything like that. This is all going to be complete speculation. But is that going to be like Indian Wells comes around and everyone loves it and everyone, it's kind of tennis paradise and ultimate fan experience we talked about last episode. And then Miami is literally straight afterwards and it's kind of the part two. It's the sequel. And so it's trying to, keep the excitement going. We'll put a positive spin on it, but there must be some kind of competition, surely.
I have to say, it gives the sort of, when you have, your older brother that's doing so well and you're the younger brother and you're like, well, I'm good at it too.
I hopped off my younger brother.
That's the vibe. But yeah, that's the vibe, but they are doing well with it. It's a really fun and exciting event. I'm not so thrown by the stadium within a stadium or the temporary nature of everything. I think there are a lot of people who, and you know what it is? I was never at the old location. I never knew the Miami Open at the old original location, which is a permanent tennis site. It's a permanent structure. They unfortunately had to leave that location because one, it was too small, but also as the tournament got bigger, the residents of the neighborhood were like, it's too loud. It was giving pretty much Wimbledon vibes where the residents were like, too loud, too many people, we don't want it. So they had two things happening there that required
That's
them to
interesting.
move.
I think Wimbledon residents kind of put up with it because they've built the identity of the location around the tennis in the last sort of 100 or so years. Miami doesn't have that. Miami, I would say, is more associated with spring break and other things. So I would imagine that more disruption for the kind of people who live in those areas might be annoying for them.
Right, right. And I think that location where I think it's called Key
Yeah,
Biscayne
I think
is in a more sort of residential
the
suburban neighborhood.
location, like the actual place, was Crandon Park. I don't know whether
Okay,
that's the name of the
okay.
venue or just specific area.
The town. Yeah.
Because
I'll have to look that up.
it was
But
Keep Biscayne though, because like when you look on Wikipedia and it says like, oh, Miami Open, it says Keep Biscayne. I always get confused because I'm like, is that the same as Miami? I'm not. I don't know
oh
my
no.
geography.
Definitely not the same as Miami. In fact, people call this the Miami Open. These grounds are nowhere near downtown Miami, the city. It is closer to Fort Lauderdale than it is to Miami. So, for example, while I'm here, I'm staying in Fort Lauderdale because it's closer. So, yeah, it's in this quote unquote parking lot, as people like to call it, but they've done a really good job. If you came here not knowing what this location was before, you would think, oh my goodness, these tennis courts are here all the time. The only thing that might throw you off is the F1 track running through it, and you can literally see the track, which is quite interesting. You can see the track and then the stands for the F1. So that's quite interesting. But otherwise, I think they've done a pretty good job of transforming this location
I mean, the
to a
tennis,
tennis
obviously,
venue.
the stadium court is, obviously temporary because, like, the Miami Dolphins want their stadium back at some point. But for that photo, that I think you put that photo on social media and of it, but those tennis courts look. Some of them must be there all the time. No,
Nope.
they all go up. They all come up.
Everything comes up and it literally becomes a parking lot where they park cars for the football games and to tailgate.
Park some very, very expensive high-speed cars about once a year.
That too.
Yeah. We can talk about the Miami Grand Prix and something else. Anyway, so okay, so that's the vibe. I think whilst I know we probably do want to talk about what happened in India and Wales, but I think it's a good opportunity to still talk about the tournament. So Miami's an interesting kind of it's an interesting kind of vibe because I've said before, like Indian Wales interests me to visit as someone from the UK. Like that was a venue I would consider making a trip over for. Or even like some of the more European tournaments, like if I was going to go abroad and like I wasn't going to do a slam, like some of the clay court events, that's more or less on my doorstep. I've never really thought about flying over to Miami for the event. It's not grabbed me in that same way. You, on the other hand, you've last couple of years you've come here from where you are. It's not too it's far, but it's not. This is the difference between UK and American culture is Americans will quite happily drive 5 hours to get somewhere, whereas for the UK, that's like, no, that's it. You've lost a day. You've lost a day.
Not worth it. But no, yeah. So for me, Indian Wells is definitely a trip. You're going across the country, and going back to sort of, I think, what this tournament kind of tries to fight with to say, no, we are also a 1,000 where people can come visit. It is no one. I don't think people are always like, oh, let's go to the Miami Open, except for if you live on the East Coast, because it's a quick, you're either driving here or it's a very, very quick flight. And also, what it is good too? A lot of Latin American fans come here to Miami instead of Indian Wells. That's the biggest thing I've
So
noticed
Latin
since
America. So
being
you're
here.
talking sort of Central America, South America as well.
South
This is where
America
the
as
Diego
well.
Schwartzman
Yeah,
fan club
yeah.
shows up.
It's in droves. It is so funny. I took a lot of video yesterday of all the fans who came for Beatrice Haddad Meyer, who were there for Diego Schwartzman. If you were a Latin American player, this is pretty much the closest you'll get, at least for now, to a home Masters or WTA 1000 event. It is, I mean, it just felt like most people speak Spanish. It's what's really funny is I was last night, the last match I watched was against Peyton Stearns and Victoria Azarenka. And all the Latin American fans were there for Victoria Azarenka, speaking to her in Spanish. And I was overhearing a couple, and I guess the girlfriend or the wife, turns to the husband and goes, she doesn't speak Spanish, right? Because he just kept yelling at her in Spanish.
Yeah, it's not a language I'm
and it
aware
was
of
so
Vika
funny.
speaking.
Exactly. So it was kind of funny, but there's a huge Latin American crowd here.
Okay, so there we go. We're going to, and usually when you get Latin American vibes, you get fans, you get a party vibe and a lot of passion about the sport.
Yeah.
So that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, let's talk about it. So obviously, when I asked you for kind of your advice for navigating Indian Wells and all that, you gave some advice that was sort of that could be applicable to all tournaments, worth repeating. But I would say, what's kind of the trick for a day out in Miami as a
I feel like you said, all the stuff I said at Indian Wells still applies to Miami and pretty much every other tournament. What I will say is, and it's kind of weird because I wouldn't have said that about Indian Wells until this year, but be prepared for the rain because Florida is a very tropical environment. It is very known for just instant thunderstorms that come out of nowhere. And I've been here, this is the second time I've been to this event. Both times I got rained out. So it's something that I feel like happens every year quite predictably at the Miami Open. And today we're witnessing something like that. It is 4:18 p.m. and a ball has not been hit.
Yeah, so we're recording on the first Friday of the Miami Open. So we've had a couple of days of tennis up to this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been regularly checking to see if the tennis has started yet, and it hasn't.
Yeah, and that's why I got excited about the courts being dried because, I just didn't think we would get any sort of play at all today. But as I look out the window right now, the courts are being dried. And so my running joke has always been that I don't understand why courts are still dried with towels and ball kids, just, wiping the courts with towels. And here I am watching the Miami Open with these, I don't know, heat machines. I think they're these white kind of massive vacuum type machines, and the court is dry. We've been talking for maybe 10 minutes and the court is dry. I don't know how they're doing it. It's kind of magic. And I want every tournament
there you go.
to do this.
Miami is leading the way in something. That's good to hear. Are they basically like giant Zambonis?
Yes, but handheld.
Okay.
So you're not riding on one. It's like they're just pushing it like they would a vacuum. And literally the court is dry. I've just watched them dry the court in 5 minutes. And I am in amazement and wonder. And I want this at every tournament.
Like, move tennis. Let's go. Let's invest in some vacuums or reverse vacuums, whatever they are. Which gives us hope that maybe we'll get some play for our time. So we'll probably better get cracking. Let's talk then Indian Wells.
Yeah, where we left you was after the first weekend at Indian Wells, so we have to catch you up on the end of the tournament.
Yeah, basically. So I guess, do you want to tell us a little bit about what happened on the ATP side? Like, what were the big stories from that was?
I mean, what were the big stories? Is it weird that I just want to start with Tommy Paul?
No, because he's kind of the big what if of that tournament.
He is truly the big what if, but also I don't think I've ever, how players are always like, oh, they have a plan they have a strategy when they come into a match and they try to execute, and you see different plays and all that stuff. I've never seen a plan so aggressively and just laser focusedly, is that even a word? Just executed. For the first set and a half, he was, or I guess the first set, because
Anastasia,
then we had the tie break.
who is he playing?
What?
You've just talked about the first set and a half, and we're like, what?
Oh,
Hang
I
on,
know.
what match was this? When was this? Who was he playing? What's the context? What is going on?
I was just so taken by his performance. I'm just like, who cares about anything else? All we want to talk about is Tommy Paul. But he was playing Daniil Medvedev in the semifinals of Indian Wells. That was a really, really big achievement for him to get to the semifinals of Indian Wells. I think it's something he's been working towards. He was literally a match away from becoming the American number one and bumping off Taylor Fritz from that position. And he came out swinging against Daniil Medvedev. I mean, he called it crushing and rushing. We asked him about that in press when he was in Miami, his pre-tournament press, and he was like, it's a thing that they've been calling crushing and rushing, basically serve and volleying. I mean, it was very aggressive play style, and it was working. It was working until I believe, and other people have different opinions, and it could be this, it couldn't be, but he suffered a severe ankle roll, and I suggest no one go look up that video, because I don't know how these tennis players can fold their ankles in that way and then
it
still
didn't
walk.
work for
Because
Zverev a
I
couple
would
of years
be.
ago.
It did not, but it's really funny because Arina Sabalenka, something very similar happened to her at Indian Wells, and I got to talk to her about it, and it's something where she's been working on her flexibility and all her exercises to make her ankle so flexible that it can withstand a lot more than most people. But after that ankle roll, he just never really was the same. And I think it could be a thing where even if he wasn't hurt, he was maybe a little bit more cautious than he had been playing, where you can't really be cautious when you're trying to play that aggressively. He was initially throwing caution to the wind and just going for it. But it was so good. And seeing that sort of performance from Tommy Paul, his athleticism, it really, I got excited. I thought, wow, if this is a Tommy Paul that shows up at tournaments, watch out, people. Watch out.
He's part of the top four American men right now, with Ted Fritz, Francis Tiafoe, Ben Shelton. I don't think I've got the order right there, but it doesn't matter. Like they're pretty closely ranked right now, top 20, top 30, and they're sort of all competing with each other. I think Paul gets a little bit less buzz about him compared to the other three. Fritz gets buzz partly because he's the number one ranked, but also he's the only one out of them who's won a big title. He's won over 1,000. He won Indian Wells a couple of years back. Tiafoe, that US Open semi-final run that he had in 2022, obviously big flashy player, big personality. And then there's just the phenomenon that is Ben Shelton. Also US Open semi-finalist. Something that Tommy... Actually, the only one of them who's not a Grand Slam semi-finalist is Taylor Fritz, weirdly.
Which is weird.
Tommy Paul did make the Aussie Open semis last year. But I do think out of those, despite his super aggressive game, Tommy Paul gets forgotten about in comparison. Probably won't be now, though.
No. I think he kind of showed a different level that was the same Tommy Paul who did beat a Carlos Alcaraz one. So I think if the tour wasn't watching, I'd say I hope they were watching, because that was very, very impressive from him. The other thing that happened was the return of Carlos Alcaraz, like the fun one.
the fun
one who wins tournaments. Yes, that one.
Wins tournaments, we should say. He does still win a lot of matches even when he's not winning tournaments. I think, let's obviously split a spoiler, like Carlos Alcaraz won Indian Wells, but there's a couple of things wrapped up in that. So I'm going to ask you two questions. They're not particularly related, but I want to hear your thoughts on both these topics. Number one, did we
Okay.
massively miss out on a Paul versus Alcaraz final? Number two, oh, never mind.
Yes.
Yes, not done. That was simple.
Yes, yes, we did. Yes, we did. I was watching that Tommy Paul Medvedev match, and I think after the first like 5 games, I was like, "Oh no, Alcaraz is going to lose Indian Wells, and he's going to lose it to
Which would
Tommy
be
Paul." That's
a
how good he was
massive plot
playing.
twist, given Alcaraz had dispatched his, let's face it, probably he's going to be someone who's going to be his biggest rival through his career, we're hoping. The
Yeah,
up until then unbeaten Yannick Sinner in the semi-finals, which was another really good match.
that was a really good match. One that surprisingly going into it, I thought Sinner would show another level and just show up
Which he
and
did. He did
win
for
the
a set.
match. He did for a set, but he did for a set. But this is also my thing with Carlos Alcaraz, and I don't know if you've noticed this trend. He is not good at first sets. He just loses a surprising amount of first sets, or he kind of like sleepwalks into the first set. I'm just like, are you okay? Are you up? What's happening? Carlitos. So I really actually wasn't surprised by that. The thing about doing that in the best of three versus best of five is you've now made it harder on yourself because best of five, okay, you still have two more sets to kind of get back into it and probably win. But if you lose the first set of a best of three, you're halfway there, you know? So it's a risky move. And usually he tends to sort of like get into it. Like the moment we had that rain delay, which I think we talked about a little bit this year at Indian Wells, there was just so much rain. They had a 4-hour rain delay, and immediately the first thing I thought was, well, Carlos is not going to win this because I just don't think he does well with that sort of thing. He's still super young. I think it's harder for him to stay focused in things like that. So I really wasn't surprised by the first set loss. What I was surprised by was the comeback. The way he sort of refocused really quickly and started playing the tennis that we have come to love that he plays, the exciting sort of just showman, doing crazy points and stuff. And the point that I think turned the match is weirdly for me a mirror of that epic point that they played in Miami last year. There's the point, everyone knows this point because I think it was sort of the point of the year where it was last year, semifinals between Yannick Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz. They play this crazy, crazy point that ends up with Carlos falling on the ground where he braced himself with his hand. And that actually took him out of Monte Carlo because he hurt his hand from the fall. And the exact mirror happened at Indian Wells, the Indian Wells semifinals they played, where they had this absolutely epic point, but this time Yannick Sinner fell over, bracing his fall with his hand, and I don't think
That
he
was
ever
early
was
in
the
the
same
third
after
set,
that
wasn't it?
fall. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he just, he kind of faded away a little bit. He seemed to have, he was stretching out his calf at one point there. He was rubbing his elbow. So, he probably was feeling it a little bit more than Carlos was. And I think after that, just Carlos ran away with the match and got to the final with Daniil Medvedev. And it was
It was a good
competitive at
first set.
first,
That
and
first
then
set was really, really intriguing and could have gone either way, I think. But I think you
yeah,
could tell Carlos was working his way into that match, and then second set kicks off.
yeah,
Carlos shakes off his set one sleepiness and carries on.
yeah, he totally did, and it was just it was a repeat of last year. Maybe not as I think last year was a little bit more one sided towards Carlos, but he did win in straight sets in the final and took the trophy at
Which
Indian
that
Wells.
trophy is a chunky piece. Like I don't know
I thought
how like anyone's expected to lift it. That does not look like it's been designed to be held. It's designed to be admired on a shelf somewhere.
And exactly, exactly. I was watching him as he was taking photos with it, and I think he kept trying every which way to just put it down. He was like, "Can I just put it down and stand next to it, please?" Because you can imagine how heavy their hands are after playing all that tennis, and then you're like, "Oh, here's a 60-pound trophy. Hold that, please, and take some photos." But he's the first repeat champion in a while. Who was
Djokovic.
the last repeat champion? I knew this. Djokovic, yes,
50, yeah,
yes,
he won 3 in a
yes,
row,
yeah,
14, 15, 16.
right. So there hasn't been a repeat champion since that, and here we go. Carlos Alcaraz did that and is now trying to, again. He was close last year, but he's trying to get the Sunshine Double
Which,
this year
he
again.
doesn't have. If we do a little bit of a current situation update in Miami, maybe, whilst we're talking ATP, he's the top seed. Djokovic is not playing. Djokovic pulled out. And Yannick Sinner is the second seed, which pleases me immensely that we are now we have officially entered the future, more or less. Obviously,
Yes.
Djokovic is still going to be around. He's still going to be a factor for another year or two at least. But certainly we're getting a sense of, the kind of seeding structure we should be getting in the next sort of 5 years or so. And, if I am now hoping that we see a Sinner Alcaraz final in Miami, another match between them, because it's always box office, and they've played one final before in their careers, but that was a 250. So this is like their biggest clash in terms of stage that it would be. But there's a lot of tennis still to play. Neither of them have played their opening match yet.
Yeah, and right now their matches just keep getting pushed back because of the weather. But no, I totally agree with you. As someone who was in the camp of, after we didn't see, we saw the retirement of Roger, and then Rafa was kind of iffy, and Novak is getting older, Serena's sister. I just thought, who's going to take over? Are we going to just be in a lull for a while in the ATP till we kind of figure it out? And it's crazy that it's almost too perfect. The timing is almost too perfect that here are two new players who are just taking on that mantle of the stars that are going to carry tennis.
It's actually fairly common. If you look at sort of how things moved, it's very rare to have a significant gap. Like, even if you look at the last sort of transition of power, if you will, when you had Sampras and Agassi at the top of the ATP, because it was basically late 1990s, early 2000s, it was basically Sampras, Agassi, and then everyone else. No offense to everyone who managed to win a Grand Slam then, it was a different kind of... And then you had Roger starting to show up in the early 2000s, and then Sampras, he played Sampras once. Agassi still had... even if his star was fading a bit, he was still a contender on the tour when Roger suddenly hit top gear and blew everyone out the water for a couple of years, and then Rafa showed up. It's not unusual to see the next generation taking over and taking control right at this point. But I think what will be interesting more as we look to the future, and this is the biggest unknown, is how much of a stranglehold Alcaraz and Sinner will have over the sport. Will it be a Federer and Nadal, Djokovic-like grip, or will it be a bit more competitive with the generations coming through? Your Mensicks, your Fonsecas, Fils. There's another kid who's that Spanish kid played yesterday. What was his name?
Oh, Martin Landaluth or Darwin Blanche, but Darwin Blanche is American.
Ben Shelton's
Martin,
Ben Shelton's the same generation as Carlos. What am I talking about?
Is he? I guess so.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? It's like the question is going to be, or like even the kids who are in juniors now, like just about to come out of juniors, how competitive is that generation, the top of that generation, going to be with the Alcaraz Sinner generation? Because if you look at the past, and I appreciate this is for newer fans, you're not necessarily going to know your tennis histories, but you might know some of these names like Borg and McEnroe had a stranglehold of the sport, but then Sampras and Agassi have talked about, like Sampras and Agassi were having to look at, like, came through and had to dethrone Edberg and Lendl and Becker and those guys, and or compete with them. How much is that going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And, we could totally go down a different rabbit hole and just talk about this, but we should bring it back to the tournaments. But I'll just say one more thing, because this is also something that's super fascinating, where, I know this sort of changing of the guard has always kind of happened throughout history, but I think we can't just talk about this without realizing that there's this whole group of guys who were around during the sort of Novak Big Three era and might be skipped over. Medvedev did win a slam, but we've got Medvedev, we've got Zverev, we've got Tsitsipas. These are supposed to be the next big three. And somehow they've got skipped over by these new kids who came in and were not afraid to compete. And that's definitely a bigger topic. I would love to talk about it at some point, but
and there's the generation before that as well, where you had your Dominic Thiem's the only one out of him, Dimitrov, Raonic, Nishikori, who won a slam. So the big three've basically messed out 2 generations of players. Probably more. No, 3 if you include their own generation.
True.
But yeah,
True.
so.
But yeah, bringing it back to the tournaments as I watch them continue to dry the courts. What was the WTA side like?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a competitive podcast, Iga Swiatek won that tournament. And it was all about her. I was wondering if there was going to be a good segue when we were talking about Alcaraz lifting the trophy. And what were the fun things for me watching Iga lift it this time? That, she's won Indian Wells before. She won it in 2022. She didn't win it in 2023, partly due to being injured, or was hampered by an injury. 2024, she's got her title back. She didn't drop a set, and she managed to lift the trophy far more comfortably this time than she did 2 years ago. She's definitely put on a bit more muscle since then. But the other thing that's kind of, we were talking about watching Carlos in this tournament and talking about, Carlos has the habit of sleepwalking through first sets. That is not normally Iga Swiatek. Until this tournament, weirdly, she I think half of her, she played 6 matches, and half of them she had to fight for a breakdown in the opening set. No, 2 of them she had to fight down for a breakdown in the first set. That was Noskova and then Wozniacki. 2 of them were highly competitive first sets up until the halfway point, and then she was just gone. And that was Danielle Collins in the opening round and Maria Sakkari in the final. And then they would do 2 absolute beatdowns in the other 2 matches. And Iga was on form, didn't look too troubled even when she was being pushed in some of those opening sets. I was watching those matches just not being fully convinced she was going to lose. I was just waiting for her because once she's warmed up, she was just hitting through everything. I mean, the final was an absolute masterclass of everything in her game working, despite the best efforts of her opponent, Maria Sakkari, who was the other story of the tournament, because she's got herself a new coach, David Witt, who was coaching Jessica Pegula up until a month ago, 2 months ago. So coaching merry-go-round in progress in the WTA, and immediately has given her a confidence boost, and she gets to the final, beats Coco Gauff. Yeah, that was probably the other story of the tournament. Like now there's a lot of questions around, okay, what's Sakkari going to do this year? And how much of a thorn on the side of the top players is she going to be? But yeah, the big story of the tournament was, unsurprisingly, Iga being a step ahead of the rest at this tournament.
Right. And it's, especially Indian Wells, because I think I watched way more Iga matches than I've ever watched in a tournament before, and also in person, which I think is so different. I think what I'm reminded by going to Indian Wells, coming to the Miami Open, is that watching tournaments live give you a different view of players. I've watched, just to pick on someone on the ATP side, Yuri Lehechka. I've watched him tons of times because he's been coming through. He's a Czech player. Everyone talks about him. So I've watched him on TV a few times. I'm like, oh, he's great. Watching him in person, different ball of wax. He is a hitter. That ball, every time he hit the ball, I was like, oh, pray for the ball. Hope the ball's okay. Hope the ball's okay. They might need to change that specific ball because it's hurt. But it was incredible. And it's the same thing with Iga, watching her in person. And I've watched some of her practices here in Miami. And it's just she's playing almost a different sport. And it makes me think, what's going to have to happen? Like, when she is put up against the big hitters, Sabalenka, Rybakina, there's some sort of competition there. Also, depending on the surface, I think they can give her a run for her money. But for the other players on the WTA, I'm like, I wonder if they're building an Iga strategy. And I'm using this in a way, sort of comparing what Tommy Paul did to Medvedev. He had a strategy. He had talked to his coach. He said this in press too, but he talked to his coach. They came up with a plan and they went into that match aggressively trying to execute that plan. And I just wonder, are players on the WTA side doing that with Iga? Because just personally, I don't see it. Just the way she can hit them off the court, where the first set is maybe competitive and then the second set is, 6-1-6 love. It's just, so you're just sort of like, are they working on an Iga plan? Can you work on an Iga plan? Because I think she just keeps getting better.
The answer to that is, you can work on a plan, but it's only going to work if Iga is less than her best. But it's the same. I would say the same thing for Arena, to be honest, on the WTA side. Arena's the similar situation. If Arena's hitting, she will hit you off the court no matter what you try. Iga will do the same thing. On the men's side, you can come up with a Carlos strategy or a Yannick strategy. They're on, you don't have a hope. And that's just the reality of it. Novak Djokovic definitely don't have a hope. So you have to rely on these guys, these players, to have a less than their best day for that strategy to work, which, to be fair, probably happens half the time. And then that gives you a chance. It doesn't guarantee you will win. So that's kind of the situation we're in. I mean, like, if we talk about Sabalenka, Indian Wells, she only made fourth round. She lost to Emma Navarro. And Sabalenka made her opponents work for it this tournament. She definitely wasn't quite right. She was making a few more unforced errors, but she makes her opponents work for it.
Yeah, I think Emma Navarro, that's a good name to bring up as well, who is someone I hadn't seen play before. I don't even think I'd watched one match that I'd heard of her. I'd seen her results. But
I was exactly the same. Like, Emma Navarro was this name I kept on seeing climbing the rankings, and I hadn't watched a match of hers. I think the only match I tried to watch was in Australia. The match she lost in Australia. I can't remember who she was playing even. Might have been Yastremska, actually. I can't remember. But so the first time I actually tried to sit down and watch her game was that Sabalenka match. Knowing full well it probably wasn't going to be a great read because I was expecting Sabalenka to win it. And then, it turns out Emma Navarro's a scrapper. She very much in the Coco Gauff mold, Jessica Pegula mold.
Yeah. No, she played some really great tennis, and I like her style. I like that sort of play. I mean, it's interesting because another person who I watched a lot of live was Coco Gauff, and I posted a lot where I'm like, her trademark now is just winning ugly. And, I said her coach wrote the book, but she's the literal image and definition of winning ugly. And I'm still on the fence on if I like that sort of tennis. Because she keeps winning and it's great. It's sort of, who cares how you win if you win sort of thing. But sometimes I think I do care how people win.
And that's something that as a fan, you have to make your own mind up about. And I'm very aware that maybe we've gone into tennis fan mode in this episode, but both of us have. Maybe we talk about that. But for me, I have a great admiration for the way Gauff's doing it. Because that's been a lot of discussions I've been having, like when I get into sort of deep fan mode and comparing Gauff to her peers, and does she belong in the same category as Swiatek and Sabalenka and Rybakina? And my answer is yes, absolutely, because she's winning as many matches, if not more matches than they are, and actually losing less often. So the reality is that she is in this elite group, but she just does it differently. She's not going to hit you off the court in the same way. I don't think she's ever going to be able to do that,
Yeah.
but it doesn't matter because she's going to win. And that's how you become a
Yeah.
champion. It's her mentality, her fighting spirit that gets her there.
Right. And and I think that's the key there, where it's almost something that I want to, every other WT player should almost look at as well, where it's sort of like, you might not have all the skills you want. Like, you're not going to hit a huge serve, and you're not going to have a super heavy backhand or forehand or whatever it is. But if you stick with it, if you fight, you're probably going to win. So yes, we've gone down these so many rabbit holes here, but it's that's just the sort of podcast we're going to have today, folks. But, I guess, so that was Indian Wells. Do we want to talk a little bit more about the experience of the Miami Open as a fan?
I was trying to get that a little bit with my earlier question of sort of what's the trick to Miami, essentially, was, what's the fan experience like? I mean, I've seen some video footage of it, some of it from you, some of it from other people, and it does feel, it looks to me like another generic big tennis tournament in terms of the layout. There's a lot of artificial grass, there's a lot of kind of temporary stands and things, but it's very popular.
Yeah, it's very popular, and it's very fun and loose. I think there is a sort of California charm to Indian Wells that Miami doesn't have. I like kind of what you said of sort of like a generic tennis tournament. Like, you come here and you're like, okay, I'm in a tennis tournament. There are no mountains, there are no views. You're not sort of like in sort of this almost daydream fantasy that I think Indian Wells creates sometimes, that you totally buy into. I don't know how to explain it, but you go to Indian Wells and you're like, I could do this. I could live in tennis paradise forever. But you come to Miami Open and you're at a tennis tournament. I do love the fact that they have so many food options. I think I was very stifled at Indian Wells, where it was like, either you were going to go have fancy Nobu sushi, or you were going to have hot dog and fries. And that was pretty much it was one or the other.
Kind of
and here they have it all, and they have these like mini food carts all over the grounds. So that was another thing about Indian Wells, is that there were a lot of food stands, but they were designated in areas, and there were always lines in everything. Where here, the carts are everywhere, and they're multiple. So, for example, one cart that I've seen here, there's an acai bowl cart, and then there are like 4 of them all around the grounds. So if one of them's full, you can always get it from somewhere else. Or wherever you are, whatever court you're on, there's a food stand near you. Everything's super walkable because it feels smaller. It doesn't seem like you have to go far to get from one court to another. I would say the practice court situation here is very different, because they have a lot of, like, very few of them can you actually watch the players practice. A lot of them are private. So, for example, they would say, if people are practicing privately at Indian Wells, you just would never know. It wouldn't be in the app or anything. But here, you'll see all these courts, and they're like, oh, I want to go watch this person practice. But I'm like, oh, but there are no stands, there are no seats. It's covered by this protected privacy screen, so you can't really see anything. But yeah, so that's the one thing I'll say. There are not as many sort of practice court situations happening here. What else can I say? Again, and this is just me personally, I don't like the big stadiums anywhere. I'm more of a small court, small stadium gal. So I would always suggest a ground pass and just staying outside on the grandstand or one of the smaller courts. You could go on the stadium court, because again, that's the only way you're going to see Sinner, Alcaraz, Iga, Coco. That's where they're going to play. They're going to put them on the stadium 100% of the time. It's actually interesting, this tournament, so Sabalenka's first match is actually grandstand, which I think is great for the fans, because they'll get to see her using a ground pass there play. But
because I was going to say, because there's the stadium court, which is obviously the main court. You've got the grandstand, and you've got Butch Buchholz's court, and then the smaller court.
Yes. And
So
then
that's
the
the
smaller courts,
setup.
yeah.
So you've got I'd say three big courts and then everything else. Bit like most tournaments, actually.
Yeah. But what I will say is, so for example, in Indian Wells, there was Stadium 1, Stadium 2. Like Grandstand is significantly smaller than Stadium 2 at Indian Wells. So it's sort of like you have this one big stadium at the Miami Open, and then everything else is actually
Okay.
very manageable. Everything else is a
So
pretty small
I
court.
guess because we're Ground Pass, we have to talk about this. Where does a Ground Pass get you, and what's the cost?
Ground Pass gets you everywhere except for
That's pretty good.
Stadium 1. So, yes, that is really good. And it costs as little as $20 at
So
this
it's
event.
very similar to Indian Wells. If anything, slightly more access than
Mm-hmm.
Indian Wells. Because Indian Wells Grand Pass only gets you to the upper echelons of Stadium 2, right?
Yes. Oh, same thing. So, same thing here in the grandstand. It's just that because the grandstand is smaller, the ticketed seats are actually just like a few rows of the lower level. So, it's not the whole lower level. It's just like maybe the first like 5 or 6 rows that are ticketed. And then everything else is available to anyone with a ground pass, and so that's great. You can, if you come early and it's not a super popular match, you could probably get a very
Okay,
great seat.
so pretty good value for a ground pass at Miami. What about stadium? If you wanted to get a stadium ticket, what's that like to set you back, and what's that like in comparison to Indian Wells?
So it's actually really funny. It's
Mm-hmm.
cheaper in the sense that, so the stadium has a lower bowl and then an upper bowl. The upper bowl is as low as
Wow.
$30, so
Okay.
you're not paying that much more from a ground pass, and then it acts as a ground pass because then you can go through the whole stadium. But you're only in the upper bowl. The lower bowl, depending on the day of the, again, it always happens this way. Depending on the day of the week, and then as you get closer to the weekend, it just gets more. It kind of fluctuates during the weeks, but I would say it's anywhere between $70 and
Okay.
$250. And I remember last year, because this is such a huge Latin American community, for Alcaraz's match last year against Taylor Fritz, I think the tickets were like, they were starting at like $350 or something like that. And they were going up from there because he's such a big draw and the tickets were just a lot and they had sold out and gone into resale. So it all depends again on who's playing and when.
Okay. Like the US Open then. Indian
Yeah.
Wells, I would
Yeah.
assume it's fairly fixed.
Yes. I was actually surprised by
That's
how
that's more like
fixed and
Wimbledon. That's what I
straightforward.
expect for Wimbledon. Like that would not change no matter
Yeah.
who was playing.
Yeah.
Um, so
Exactly.
that's very, very interesting. Sort of, and I think it's worth sort of sitting in and comparing it. I guess then listening to that, the upper bowl you're talking about, um, how high up is it? Like, how much do the players look? How much can you actually see from the upper bowl? Not much.
You can, not much. You can see a lot. You're seeing like, sort of 2-inch high players playing tennis. And until the finals, I really think until the finals, it's actually pretty sparse up there. Um, I've noticed what, at least the matches I've watched, this is only day 4 we're in now, but the stadium has never been packed because I think everyone's just outside because that's where most of the action is
Okay, so
happening, really.
I'm because I'm like thinking, if I was to plan a trip to Miami, obviously you've done it before. Like, I would be tempted by the upper bowl. It's only £10 more, $10. What country is this? $10 more than a ground pass with the same. You can get out with the same access plus a little bit more. Um,
Yeah, and I would say so. If you are if you are worried about the costs and stuff, but you really, really want to see Carlos Alcaraz, I cannot suggest more. Just get a ground pass and go watch him practice, and you'll see him way big, really close. And I was watching his practice with Francisco Cerundolo, and I was surprised, like, this could have been a match. I mean, they went all out. Some of the points in their practice, I was like, how is this not a match? who's recording
Oh,
this.
wait, I am.
But I am. But it was really good. So because again, I think especially for most people coming to these events who are just fans, it's really not about seeing Carlos Alcaraz play his first round match, or it's just seeing him, maybe getting an autograph or something like that. And the practice courts, I think, is the place to see your favorite player up close and also see them play some tennis.
I mean, that's assuming, of course, they don't go for private court.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But I think all of them, all the big players at least once or twice in the tournament will be on a proper practice court where people can see them play.
All right. Well, I think we've been going for almost an hour. Before we wrap up the podcast, Anastasia, what's the drying situation like?
It's dry. They have what they now have are these sort of big heat fans. I think because it's been raining all day, I'm pretty sure that the sort of moisture has seeped into the court. So they have these big, giant fans that are blowing on the court. They're definitely, all the officials are out on the court. I see ball kids are coming to the court. The stadium has started filling up again. So people are coming in, and they have Coco Gauff's name against Nadia Podoroska. Yep. It's listed as the next matchup. And there's the announcement coming on. So I think we're gonna start playing tennis, in
which case I've got to put the TV on, and I'm going to be watching Aryna Sabalenka against Paula Badosa. That's my choice.
Oh, you know what? So that's going to be a thing, because I actually don't know how the outside courts are doing in terms of being dry.
Well, if they aren't dry, then the Gauff Podoroska is still a really good match.
Yeah, but I think they are definitely getting everything dry and to get at least some matches going.
Okay, so we're going to go and watch tennis, and Anastasia is going to bring lots of coverage from it, which obviously you can see if you follow us on social media. So we're now on YouTube.
We're now on YouTube. So if you want to listen to the podcast on YouTube, which apparently a lot of people do, you can as well. But you also can get all the footage that I've been getting from all these tournaments that I'm at. So you can see what it's like on the grounds and all that stuff.
Don't worry, if you follow us on Instagram and Threads, you'll still get all the videos there as well. So we're not abandoning you.
Exactly.
We love you guys. No. Like you got here first. So you'll always be our favorites.
Yes, you will. All those thread friends, you will always be our favorite.
Actually shouting people's names out at some point. But before we kind of wrap up, obviously keep an eye out for all this footage that Anastasia is going to be sharing. If you follow Talking Tennis as well, a lot of Anastasia's footage and interviews are going to be going on there. But let's wrap up, as we should always do, with Player of the Fortnight. Have you decided yours yet, Anastasia?
Yes, I have. I did the moment I saw it, and it has to be Tommy Paul. Just really, really great athlete. Way to execute a plan. If you didn't know about Tommy Paul before, you really should know about him now, and keep up with him this season, because I think he really is. Oh my goodness, players are on court. We're going to get tennis. Players are on court. It's so exciting. But I really do think he's trying to make moves this season, and he's worth a watch.
Definitely Tommy Paul. All right. My choice for Player of the Fortnight, a little bit interesting. So I could go with the obvious. I could go with the winner. Emma Navarro is a potential option as well. We talked about her, or even Marta Kostyuk. But I'm actually going to go with a player who lost in the second round in Indian Wells and literally lost last night as well. And that's Peyton Stearns. I'm going to go with Peyton Stearns. And the reason I'm going with Peyton Stearns is I don't think I have seen a player generate headlines despite losing in the way that she has. So I think if you remember our last episode, we literally recorded it. Actually, we recorded our last episode the day after an epic Peyton Stearns match. In that case, it was against Aryna Sabalenka. And then she's also now played her fellow Belarusian double Australian Open champion, Victoria Azarenka, last night. And that was another epic. And the reaction to Peyton Stearns, who has only been on tour for just over a year or two, having come out of college, has been super responsive. There's a lot of people very excited about her game, about her forehand, and the way she competed with these champions was really, really impressive. And I think for someone who to kind of make waves in the way that she's done makes her a name to watch. And I think, across the fortnight, across the two tournaments, I can't ignore Peyton Stearns. So that's my player for the fortnight.
That is a really great choice. Was my favorite match of Indian Wells, that Azarenka, not Azarenka, sorry, that's who she played yesterday, but Sabalenka and Peyton Stearns match was epic. And then I stayed late here just to watch her match against Azarenka, and it was totally worth it. She's a fun watch. Big stadium player. I keep saying it. She just needs a big stadium, and she's gonna light up. So yeah, like Chris.
Brilliant. All right. Well, Anastasia, you go and watch some tennis. I'm going to go turn the TV on and watch some tennis. We'll be back in 2 weeks to wrap up everything that's happened in Miami and talk a little bit about some of the tennis that might have happened since then at other tournaments. But thanks everyone for listening. We love you all, and we'll be back to bring you all the tennis on the ground.